Good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and call the joint hearing between the Accountability and Administrative Review Committee and Natural Resources Committee to order. Today we'll be looking at the state environmental incentives for low and moderate income families. Let me first begin by saying that there's copies of today's agenda on the table outside in the back. The goal of today's hearing is to hear testimony not only from ARB and the other agencies, but really to talk about how these programs are advantageous for our disadvantaged communities and those of lower socioeconomic income. What programs are available, what programs are being utilized, and what proportion they're being utilized, and really by regionally, because I know we have members from different regions throughout the entire state who are curious about how it affects their region in particular. The issue at hand is really how do we strike the balance between providing Californians these programs and making sure that it's benefiting everyone and not just a select few. We've all seen the reports that have come out from UC Berkeley, for instance, that talks about how these programs may or may not incentivize certain individuals. We've also seen the various articles, Sacramento Bee being one of them, also talking about, are green subsidies going to those that it needs to target? Are these subsidies having an impact on greenhouse gas emissions? Are we targeting these fundings and these programs to those communities that need it the most? And so with that, let me go ahead and just open it up to my colleagues to see if anybody has opening statements. And I do thank my Vice Chair on Accountability, Mr. Tom Lackey, for joining us as well. So let me ask if anybody would like to make any opening comments. Mr. Quirk.
Large part to deal with the energy issues in the state, particularly with regard to global warming. And I don't see how I could move forward with any legislation in this area without thoroughly understanding its impact on people, particularly low and moderate income. So thank you very much for being here to testify.
Okay, additional comments? Seeing none, let me go ahead and call up the first panel. And the first panel will be the Air Resources Board talking about cap and trade funding and a program overview. And then we'll move into a discussion on the specific programs that ARB oversees, including the Clean Vehicle Rebate Program. I believe joining us today is Alberto Ayala, who is a Deputy Executive Officer with ARB, and Cynthia Marvin, who is the Chief over at Transportation and Toxics Divisions over at the ARB. So whenever you'd like to begin. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, it's on. Good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. Thank you specifically Chair Salas, Chair Stone, and members of the committee. As you mentioned, my name is Alberto Ayala. I'm Deputy Executive Officer at the Air Resources Board. What I want to do today is give you some information to convey some of the activities that we are undertaking in making investments from our cap and trade program, specifically to advance technology transformation and help disadvantaged communities. As you know, the Air Resources Board has two roles in implementing cap and trade. The first focuses on coordinating across all state agencies and providing guidance on maximizing disadvantaged community benefits. It also involves reporting criteria and greenhouse gas quantification methods for all agencies implementing auction proceeds. The second role is administering the low-carbon transportation program, which, as you know, invests proceeds in greenhouse gas reduction projects, specifically in the transportation sector. So if you would allow me to, let me start by giving you some background on the cap and trade program before we launch into more detail on low carbon transportation. Cap and trade, as you know, is a key strategy for reducing California's greenhouse gas emissions, and the auction proceeds are one component of this broader program. In this program, ARB places a cap on greenhouse gas emissions by issuing a limited number of tradable permits or allowances. These are equal to the cap. A portion of the allowances are distributed for free, a portion are placed in a reserve, and the remaining are auctioned. The funds raised by the quarterly sale of California state-owned allowances are deposited into the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, or GGRF, and are available for appropriation. In addition to state allowances, the cap-and-trade program provides allowances to electrical utilities. Some utilities must auction these allowances, and the proceeds must be used for ratepayer benefit. The auction of state allowances and the resulting proceeds provide an opportunity for the state to invest in actions that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, with an emphasis on our disadvantaged communities. Not only do these investments play an important role in achieving our broader climate program goals, they also generate other environmental, economic, and public health co-benefits. In 2012, the legislature enacted legislation that set the framework for these investments. SB 535 by Senator De Leon requires that at least 25% of proceeds be spent on projects that benefit directly California's disadvantaged communities, with at least 10% of the projects located directly within these communities. Existing law also requires the Department of Finance, in consultation with the Air Board and other state agencies, to develop an investment plan every 3 years to identify priority investments. The administration just completed the 3-year investment plan for the 2016 to 2019 fiscal years, which the Department of Finance transmitted to the legislature last month. Proceeds are then appropriated each year in the Annual Budget Act on programs and projects that are consistent with the priorities identified in the investment plan. To date, the legislature has appropriated nearly $2.4 billion. We provided you a handout that shows the appropriations made to each state department. Additional program details will be included in an annual report on the expenditure of proceeds, which is due to the legislature March 1st. Based on preliminary data we are compiling for this report, we are estimating that agencies as a whole will invest over 30% of cap-and-trade proceeds in projects that benefit disadvantaged communities, including low-income residents in these communities. These projects are bringing a number of benefits to California's disadvantaged communities. For example, CAL FIRE's urban forestry program is planting trees in disadvantaged communities throughout the state, providing community shading while improving active transportation and recreational opportunities. Caltrans' low-carbon transit operations program is supporting new and expanded services and facilities that improve mobility for disadvantaged community residents. These are just 2 examples of many, and you're going to hear about 2 other programs after our presentation. So with that as a backdrop, let me move on and discuss more specifically the Air Resources Board's actions for our low-carbon transportation program. These appropriations are focusing on projects that benefit disadvantaged communities and lower-income families. ARB has received a total of $325 million to date. We are on track to direct more than 50% of these funds to projects that provide benefits in the disadvantaged communities most impacted by air and climate pollution. These investments are designed to accelerate the transition to low-carbon freight and passenger transportation. This funding expands the clean vehicle projects that ARB started through the AB 118 Air Quality Improvement Program. So let me highlight some of the key incentives and other programs for cleaner passenger cars, if you would allow me to. These are guided by SB 1275 by Senator De Leon, which created the Charge Ahead California initiative to increase the number of zero-emission vehicles on California's roads and increase access to these vehicles for lower-income Californians and disadvantaged communities. There's a number of programs inside of this portfolio of efforts. The first one is the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project, or CVRP, which provides rebates to consumers for the purchase or lease of battery electric, fuel cell electric, and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. This program helps achieve the large-scale transformation of the car fleet away from fossil fuel combustion, which is necessary so that we can meet, as a state, our air quality and climate goals. Since 2010, when the program began, we have issued rebates to over 130,000 cars. I'll note that about 6% of these rebates today have gone to cars registered specifically in disadvantaged communities, and about 35% of the rebates have gone to cars that live within zip codes that include disadvantaged communities. Pursuant to SB 1275, we are instituting an income cap and providing high rebates for lower-income consumers within CVRP. These changes will launch next month, and we hope that this will increase participation by lower-income vehicle buyers. We're also ramping up outreach in disadvantaged communities to make them aware of these new opportunities. CVRP is not the only program. We have a complement of other programs aimed at increasing access to clean vehicles for residents in disadvantaged communities and lower-income households. We have included $9 million in low-carbon transportation funding for these projects in our 2014 cycle, and more recently, we added another $10 million in our 2015 cycle for these projects. These include retirement and replacement incentives, a new and exciting car-sharing program, financing assistance to increase access to these technologies, and increase incentives for public fleets operating in disadvantaged communities. So let me touch briefly on each of these programs. So the first one I'll cover is the Vehicle Retirement and Replacement Program. The Enhanced Fleet Modernization Program, or EFMP, has two components, a retirement-only and a retirement and replacement component. The retirement-only is run by the Bureau of Automotive Repair, with whom we work very closely in designing guidelines for the program. It provides compensation for low-income vehicle owners to retire their older, higher-emitting vehicles. The retirement and replacement portion of EFMP is administered by ARB in coordination with two air districts, the South Coast and the San Joaquin Valley air districts. This component provides higher incentives to a person who retires their vehicle and is willing to purchase a replacement vehicle that meets certain fuel efficiency criteria, which we establish. We're using the low-carbon transportation funding to increase the focus of the retirement and replacement component on disadvantaged communities through the EFMP Plus Up. With the growth of zero-emission vehicle sales and the start of a used zero-emission vehicle sale market, we see this as a perfect opportunity to help lower-income Californians into these advanced technologies that we believe are our future. Under this project, lower-income vehicle owners living in or near disadvantaged communities in the South Coast Air Basin and in the San Joaquin Valley get increased funding if they purchase a new or used hybrid, plug-in hybrid, or pure zero-emission vehicle. We're pleased with these pilots because we've seen some very encouraging early success and are very excited and ready to expand this program to other air districts in the next budget cycle, when we expect to more than double our EFMP Plus Up program. We hope to grow the project even further as we move forward and the market evolves to make that possible. The second program I'd like to discuss for you briefly is we're implementing to increase access to zero-emission vehicles in car sharing. Car sharing programs provide people the access to vehicles to improve mobility without the need and the cost of vehicle ownership. Our car sharing investments will help bring cleaner vehicles to disadvantaged communities. We've awarded grants to start a new project in Los Angeles and to expand an existing car sharing effort to serve the Barrio Logan and Logan Heights neighborhoods in San Diego. These projects are going to launch later this year. Moving on to the component that provides financial assistance, we have recently granted the Community Housing Development Corporation, a nonprofit in Richmond, with this project, which will help lower-income residents in disadvantaged communities in the Bay Area purchase clean vehicles by improving access to more affordable financing through mechanisms such as loan loss guarantees or interest rate buy-downs. It will launch to the public later this year, and we hope to expand financing assistance programs to other lower-income households in more parts of California in future years. Finally, we also launch increased incentives for public fleets operating in and near disadvantaged communities to buy CVRP-eligible vehicles last February, and we are already seeing strong participation. These disadvantaged community-focused projects are critical to ensuring all Californians have access to the cleanest transportation options. We plan to scale up these projects and increase investments in the upcoming budget cycles. Let me now turn to talk briefly about the heavy-duty sector, which is perhaps more important. So this has to do with investments that we are making in heavy-duty truck, in buses, and freight equipment. While these incentives are not targeted directly to low-income families per se, we are designing them to be located in or near the most disadvantaged communities where possible to improve air quality in these neighborhoods. These investments are guided by SB 1204 by Senator Lara and intended to help accelerate the introduction of the next generation of cleaner heavy-duty vehicles and engine, supporting the transformation towards zero emissions. Let me talk about these projects briefly. The first one is the Hybrid and Zero Emission Truck and Bus Voucher Incentive Project, or HVIP. This program helps purchase hybrid and zero-emission trucks and buses. Since we launched the program in 2010, HVIP has provided about 2,400 vouchers, and nearly half these funds have gone to vehicles located in disadvantaged communities, and over two-thirds are domiciled or operated in zip codes containing these disadvantaged communities. As a complement to HVIP, we are also launching new pilot projects to support large-scale commercial deployment of zero-emission trucks and buses, with a requirement that 100% of the funding go to vehicles that operate in and near disadvantaged communities. We have $24 million in a solicitation that just closed. We received 38 applications requesting a total of $290 million. So you can see that there is very strong demand for these projects. Funding pre-commercial demonstration of technologies is another key element of our incentive portfolio. We are funding two larger-scale freight projects, each at about $24 million. One is going to demonstrate zero-emission drayage trucks serving ports and other freight hubs and operating in disadvantaged communities around these facilities. The other project is going to demonstrate advanced technologies that operate in multi-source facilities, such as distribution centers, warehouses, and ports, which, as you can imagine, are also located in disadvantaged communities. We plan to fund additional projects in the next funding cycle. So let me just close by emphasizing how important investments in zero and near zero emission technologies are in both the light-duty and the heavy-duty sector. In order for us to increase access to these clean technologies to lower-income persons living in disadvantaged communities so that we can reduce air and climate pollution in those communities. This is a priority for the Air Resources Board. There has been strong demand for these projects, and we anticipate increased funding for projects to benefit disadvantaged communities in the future. Thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you. No, Ms. Marvin, did you wish to?
No, I'm just here to respond to any questions you have about the program in general.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, let me go ahead and just start and kick it off, but just for anyone watching or listening, can you just define for us how the ARB defines low income and how they define disadvantage so that we all understand which criteria we're using?
Want to take that?
Well, I'll certainly start with the disadvantaged communities. So, consistent with the state legislation, the Secretary for Environmental Protection identified the top 25% of the census tracts in the state that would be termed disadvantaged. They used a model called CalEnviroScreen. I know there's been a number of hearings and some interest in the legislature about that. And so we use the Cal EPA identified disadvantaged communities 2,000 census tracts in California, and that is consistent across all of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund programs. Want to do low income? Carbon transportation?
Yeah. So the answer is we have this recognized tool that we use to identify the communities. As far as low income, in our CVRP program, we have instituted a number of criteria to define the different income levels, and we have limited the income brackets to for rebates to individuals with incomes, gross incomes of $250,000. So the rebates, the programs are targeted to levels below that. And as I said, CVRP was recently modified not only to implement a cap on income, but also the lower the income, the higher the incentive that a person receives.
Got it. And when was that cap implemented?
This is implemented in the current cycle. I'm sorry. So Ms. Gress just handed me. So it's 200 and let me give you a correction. The low income is defined as less than 225 the federal poverty level for our retirement and replacement program.
Got it.
These are programs that these are changes to the program, modifications to the programs that have been instituted recently. I believe we included that in the last funding cycle for the programs.
Got it. Okay.
I would just note that in the other programs that are funded here, each one defines low income in a different way. You'll be hearing from some of the other key programs after us.
Okay. And then we'll ask them as well why the discrepancy between how we define low income and what that actually means. Because my understanding is we don't use the CalEnviroScreen, which you had mentioned, Ms. Marvin, as really the basis for all programs across. So, I mean, are we using CalEnviroScreen as defining disadvantaged communities, or are we only looking at differences when we define low income?
We are consistently using CalEnviroScreen to define the geographic areas. So geographically, CalEnviroScreen makes that definition within each program to target funds towards low-income consumers and others. That is done within each program.
Okay, thank you. So let me just talk about, and you guys had brought up the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project. You know, that's seems to be one of the programs that's been highlighted fairly recently in all the media. Is basically, if I could sum it up, you know, these incentives are going towards people that are buying Teslas and higher income folks as opposed to lower moderate income. Happy to see that the ARB has now implemented caps on that. But for what we have spent so far, how much of that has gone towards low and moderate income? How much has, how truthful of a statement is that from the media? If you can just address some of those concerns.
Sure. I'd be happy to just give you a perspective on that. First of all, the CVRP program is, what we're trying to accomplish is the broad transformation of the fleet away from fossil fuel combustion. So we need these zero-emission vehicles to reach every segment of the income brackets. But, I mean, just to give you some clarification, perhaps to put in perspective what the media is saying, you talk about specifically about Tesla rebates. 82% of our total rebates have gone to non-Tesla buyers. So these are folks that are purchasing vehicles like the Nissan Leaf, like the Chevy Volt. So while the media may point to Tesla, the Tesla situation, when you look at our program as a whole, Again, 82% of all the rebates have gone to other cars,
Got it.
not including Tesla.
But with that, I think the nexus and what the media was kind of alluding to is that these rebates, whether it's Tesla or anybody else, is going to families or individuals that are making, six-figure salaries. Yeah. Do you have that data broken down?
I do, and again, to give you a perspective, half of all participants in our CVRP project are individuals or families that are making $150,000 a year or less. So, admittedly, yes, there are some that are in the higher income brackets, but the point here is that there are a lot of people that are not necessarily in those high income brackets. And again, CVRP is designed to try to attempt and accomplish this broad transformation. And, we're happy to say that I think some of the programs that I described in my testimony are really going to help us shift the dynamics of the market so that more people have access to these technologies.